What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Budget Analysis Podcast, where we help you understand the allocation and breakdown of the Department of Labor and Employment budget from the year 2020 to 2023.
Welcome to Budget Rock. This is episode 1, Budgeting Amid a Crisis, Deep Dive into DOLE's 2020 to 2021 financial performance. I am Kimverly, Badajos.
And I'm Alessandra, Patawaran. Hi partner, it's nice to be with you here again as we talk about how the Department of Labor and Employment were able to utilize their fund amidst the pandemic.
I am also elated to discuss our topic today to our dear listeners. As some of you might not realize, but government budgeting is imperative.
That's so true, and the pandemic started in the Philippines on March 2020. But the 2020 budget of DOLE was already approved by that time. And we really did not expect that we will be greatly affected by this.
Yes, and with the community quarantine being implemented, it is much harder for everyone because employees were laid off from their jobs and we were not allowed to go outside. So for this episode, I think everyone is curious about the struggle of DOLE at that time in relation to workers, establishments, and businesses that were closed and how they cope up and reconstructed their budget to meet the needs of the Filipinos.
Yep, and that's also the very reason why the actual expenditure program of the DOLE in 2020 was more than doubled compared to what was approved, due to additional appropriation provided to respond to the impact of the pandemic. The DOLE is set to launch in 2021, a program creating millions of jobs for displaced workers. That's also the very reason why they had an additional fund in the 2021 budget.
In order to support their vision and address the persistent problems of unemployment and underemployment, DOLE came up with programs that will be aided by their proposed budget, which was approved under the General Appropriations Act for 2020. And initially, they were granted an amount of 12,057,296,000 pesos, which comprises of 2,451,773,000 pesos for personal services, 9,456,000,000 and 144,000 pesos for maintenance and other operating expenses, and 8 million for financial expenses, and lastly, 141,000,000 and 379,000 pesos for capital outlays.
As I've observed based on what you've said, partner, the maintenance and other operating expenses have larger increment with 78.4% of the total budget of DOLE, followed by personal services, capital outlays, and financial expenses.
That's a good point, Alex. Also, the operations under all the allotment classes except the capital outlays have the biggest share of the budget. This could be because different programs implemented by DOLE are supported by various regions under the operations.
But what about their financial performance at the end? Because we know that the pandemic significantly impacted the government's fiscal situation.
This was really a tough time for our country as multiple revisions were made to the government's fiscal plan, and DOLE was also not an exemption from these changes as the department has reconstructed its budget to address the crisis. In the end, they had a total of 43.2 billion for the creation and execution of labor and employment policies and programs, including the provision of aid to displaced local employees and OFWs affected by the pandemic. Compared to the 16.2 billion or the 92.7% obligation in 2019, the total obligation for the year was decreased to 88.3% obligation rate.
We can say that there were low obligation and disbursement rate due to the pandemic recession, as travel restrictions implemented during the lockdown hampered the delivery of goods and services. But what about the programs they implemented during that time?
That's a great question, partner. I'm sure some of our viewers here also benefited from the program of DOLE. Among their major initiatives is the Livelihood and Emergency Employment Program, which accounts for an obligated budget of 17.3 billion and is comprised of the following programs. First, the TUPAD and the GIP program with 12 billion pesos. Second, the DILP with 7 billion pesos. And lastly, the AMMP with 4.5 billion pesos. And did you know, partner, they had used over 1 billion pesos to fund the emergency TUPAD Barangay Ko, Bahay Ko to assist informal sector workers hard hit by the pandemic. It had 275,000 beneficiaries.
Wow, they really help a lot of our fellow kababayan. I also want to share that in the fiscal year of 2021, DOLE had COVID-19 Adjustment Measures Program, where formal sector workers were also provided with one-time cash assistance of 5,000 pesos. Meanwhile, Displaced OFWs who are in the country or are still in their host countries got cash assistance of $200. But for those who went back to the country, it provided them the equivalent of 10,000 pesos under the Abot Kamay ang Pagtulong or AKAP. On the other hand, the DOLE served about 6.2 million beneficiaries through various programs, with an accomplishment rate of 192.8%.
However, it wasn't really just pure rainbow for DOLE because they also had challenges to their fund utilization and liquidation process during 2020. For instance, they were criticized by COA for accumulating 1.572 billion pesos in unliquidated cash advances, which the audit agency said might be prone to misuse, and the unliquidated funds were cash advances granted to their officers for the implementation of DOLE's COVID-19 programs. So it goes to show that they have insufficient internal control measures in the grant of financial assistance.
I also heard about that, and it was actually the same issue during the 2021 budget, where Commission on Audit cited substantiated claims and lack of documentary requirements, as well as insufficient monitoring and validation of the beneficiaries, money remittance centers, and also the proponents, as among the deficiencies noted by its audit team.
Oh, that is alarming. I hope they learn from that mistake and implement the recommendations of the COA.
And I think that's about it for our first episode. We hope that you've learned from our analysis of DOLE's 2022 to 2021 financial performance.
If you are curious to know more about their budget utilization and programs, don't forget to follow our podcast and be updated for the next episode.
Again, I'm Alessandra Patawaran.
And I am Kimverly Badajos. You are listening to Budget Wrap.
Welcome to Budget Wrapped Episode 2, Unpacking the 2022 to 2023 DOLE Budget, a closer look at the Department of Labor and Employment's plans and priorities. In this episode, we will delve into the 2022 to 2023 budget of the Department of Labor and Employment and examine how it supports the government's goals for the labor and employment industry. This is Pauline Carpio.
And I'm Andrea Senobio. Aside from what you said, partner, we will also discuss the key initiatives and programs that DOLE plans to prioritize in 2023 and how they will impact businesses, workers, and job seekers. Furthermore, we will explore the challenges and opportunities that businesses and workers may face as they adjust to the new budget.
I am thrilled to talk to our devoted viewers and listeners about our topic today.
Yes, me too, partner. I am so excited to share what I have researched with the new budget appropriations for DOLE. Did you know that DOLE's budget for this year was cut by about 17% compared to the previous year? And from 2020 to 2022, the proposed budget were always increasing. But for this year, they cut a lot of budget for their programs. And by the way, guys, it is just a snapshot of what we will be discussing for our topic in this episode. We still have more to discuss.
As you all know, the budget of the Department of Labor and Employment is important for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it helps to fund the programs and initiatives that DOLE uses to promote employment and protect the right of workers in the Philippines. For the year 2022, the Department of Labor and Employment has set aside 50.7 billion pesos, a sum that is 36.66% greater than the 37.1 billion set aside in the year 2021.
Wow, you see guys, we really did our research very well. And as we all know, the Philippine economy has been one of the hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, the DOLE's primary focus in its 2023 budget is on creating more jobs and providing social protection for workers. The DOLE has proposed a number of initiatives in its 2023 budget that are aimed at achieving their three objectives, which includes, first, the enhancement of the employability of Filipino workers and the competitiveness of MSME. Second, ensuring the protection of workers' rights and the maintenance of industrial peace. Lastly, strengthening social protection for vulnerable workers.
The bulk of the total budget of the DOLE and its attached agencies in 2022 allotted for maintenance and other operating expenses in the amount of 43.95 billion pesos. Its shares of the total budget further increased to 86.58% in 2022 from 82.03% in 2021. The allocation for personal services of 6.29 billion had the second largest share of 12.41% in 2022, lower than the 17.7% share in 2021. The budget for capital outlay bounced back to 498.7 million in 2022 after declining by 73.5% to 87.7 million in 2021. The budget for financial expenses or FinEx remained at 9.7 million in 2022.
In 2023 budget, the maintenance and other operating expenses also has the highest percentage of budget allotted by the DOLE, garnering an 81% of the total budget with the amount of 30 billion pesos. It is much lower than the previous year with the budget amounting to 43.95 billion pesos, while the allocation for personal services is 60% with 7 billion pesos allotted budget, and the capital outlays cut the rest of 2% of the remaining budget amounting to 38 million pesos.
Did you know, partner, that the Department of Labor and Employment's Tulong Pangkabuhayan sa Ating Disadvantaged or Displaced Workers or TUPAD program got an increase of 12 billion pesos for the year 2022? It is despite of the alleged anomalies in the distribution of cash aids to the beneficiaries. The House of Representatives has approved the DOLE's request for an additional budget for the program, which benefited over 2 million workers displaced during the COVID-19 pandemic. The committee headed by CIS Party List Representative Eric Yap has realigned 10 billion pesos in the additional appropriation for the government's Cash for Work program. Even though the budget for this year 2022 had an anomalies about that cash aid, they did a great job on the other programs.
Really? And yet they decreased the budget for that in this year for about 24%. That cut in this program will definitely affect the lives of unemployed and underemployed Filipinos. The reason for this budget cut is that DOLE believes that our country is nearing the new normal. With the reopening of the country's economy, according to them, it is expected that more workers will be returning to their work. So in conclusion, the 2022 budget focused on the TUPAD and GIP programs as they increased the budget for it, while the new budget appropriation for the year 2023 is focused on employment services, labor relations and management cooperation, workers' protection and welfare, labor standards and inspection, and economic development and employment facilitation.
Again, I'm Pauline Carpio.
And I'm Andrea Senobio. You are listening to Budget Rock.
Welcome to Budget Wrapped, where we search for truth in the age of misinformation. Diving into this topic, we have prepared a series of episodes entitled Proper Budget Allocation as found an extensive conclusion of Department of Labor and Employment's Plan of Action. I'm Nicajobelle Amarrador. For today's episode, I will be giving some of our suggestions or recommendations with regards of the budget utilization of DOLE. Proper budget allocation is a measurement that an organization is really working towards great success. For the past years, according to the audit report of COA, there are a number of audit recommendations that need to be fully implemented. The proposed budget for 2023 went down, then they created the Department of Migrant Workers, which has a 15 billion proposed budget, including the 11.7 billion for the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration. It is reasonable that the budget for 2023 decreases, but the DOLE must allocate its budget appropriately as there is a wider scope of people that needs work. Also, we recommend hiring quality personnel to help the department develop and implement more innovative programs and services that can better respond to the changing needs of workers. Expanding the coverage of its existing programs will enable them to reach more people by providing the assistance they need. With that, we recommend increasing their budget for TUPAD and social protection programs. These programs will surely benefit those qualified people affected by COVID-19, and increasing will promote more employment with DOLE personnel. However, they should ensure to design additional control measures to avoid double payments of financial assistance and alleviate the anomalies happening in the succeeding implementation of their programs. To sum up everything, despite the issues they faced for fiscal year 2020, 2021, and 2022, DOLE had almost utilized their allotments for the three regular programs, namely TUPAD, DILP, and GIP, thereby leaving a minor unutilized amount which results in a greater percent accomplishment over the target beneficiaries for the respective years, thus achieving DOLE's contribution to the government's agenda of inclusive growth through massive job generation and poverty reduction. We commend the department for making unwavering efforts to carry out the projects, initiatives, and activities required by its mandate, despite the COVID-19 pandemic risk, in order to support the government's vision for inclusive growth through significant job creation and poverty reduction. We hope that our podcast and budget analysis will be a valuable resource for our listeners as they engage and question the government about particular funding issues, including how effectively it allocates, implements, and spends money.